The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss, and Lieutenant Katie Brennan stepped onto the metal floor of Helix Prime Station. The air smelled different here, recycled and filtered through machines that served 100 different species. She took a deep breath and looked around at the massive docking bay. She was the first human to ever set foot in the Galactic Coalition's military exchange program. For 300 years, cadets from across the galaxy had trained together at Korath Academy. They learned to fight, to lead, to survive. But humans had never been invited. Until now. Katie stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighed 120 pounds. Back on Earth, she was considered average. Here, surrounded by aliens twice her size, she looked like a child standing among giants. Admiral Grace Patterson walked beside her, the senior human officer assigned to oversee the exchange. The admiral was tall for a human woman, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen 3 decades of military service. "Remember your training," Patterson said quietly. "Remember why you are here." Katie nodded. She knew exactly why she was here. Humanity needed to prove itself. The Coalition had accepted Earth into its ranks 5 years ago. But many species still saw humans as primitives, weak, fragile, prey. Today was the first step in changing that perception. A group of Varax soldiers stood waiting at the end of the docking bay. Katie had studied their species extensively during her preparation. They were reptilian creatures, standing 8 feet tall on average, with thick scaled hides and claws that could tear through ship armor. Their military traditions stretched back thousands of years. They were considered the finest warriors in the Coalition. The largest Varax stepped forward. His scales were dark green, almost black, and a long scar ran down the left side of his face. His translator implant buzzed as he spoke. "I am Commander Torvak. I oversee all cadet training at this facility." His yellow eyes moved slowly over Katie, examining her the way a predator examines potential food. "We were told the humans would send their best warrior. Is this a joke?" Admiral Patterson kept her voice calm. Lieutenant Brennan graduated first in her class at the Naval Academy. She holds certifications in 17 forms of close combat. She will represent humanity well. Torvik made a clicking sound with his jaw. Katie recognized it from her studies as the Varax equivalent of laughter. "We shall see how long she lasts." He turned and walked away without another word. The other Varax followed, their heavy footsteps echoing through the docking bay. Katie felt the Admiral's hand on her shoulder. "Do not let them get inside your head. They want you to feel small. They want you to fail." "I know," Katie said. "I will not give them the satisfaction." The orientation hall was enormous. Hundreds of cadets from a dozen different species filled the space, their voices creating a constant buzz of different languages and sounds. Katie stood near the back, observing everything. The Varax dominated the center of the room. They moved in groups, their massive bodies taking up space that 3 humans could occupy. Other species gave them room, stepping aside when they passed. This was clearly their territory. The Vesic were there too, insectoid creatures with 4 arms and compound eyes. They were smaller than the Varax, but known for their precision and speed. Katie watched as one of them assembled and disassembled a weapon in seconds, its 4 hands moving in perfect coordination. High above, the Moravi perched on elevated platforms. They were bird-like beings with colorful feathers and hollow bones that allowed them to fly in low-gravity environments. Their culture valued diplomacy and perception. They were watching everything, just like Katie. A holographic display appeared in the center of the room, showing barracks assignments. Katie found her name near the bottom of the list. Barracks 7, Overflow Section. She made her way through the crowded halls, following the directions on her personal display unit. The barracks were located on the lower levels of the station, away from the main training facilities. When she arrived, She found a simple room with 8 bunks arranged in 2 rows. 3 of the bunks were already occupied by Varax cadets. Their gear was spread across the floor, taking up far more space than necessary. 2 Vesik-occupied bunks on the opposite side, their equipment neatly organized in precise rows. A single Moravi sat on an upper bunk, preening its feathers and watching with bright golden eyes. Katie moved toward the only empty bunk, a lower bed near the door. Before she could reach it, one of the Varax stepped into her path. He was younger than Commander Torvak, probably the equivalent of a human in his early 20s. His scales were bright green, and his eyes held the arrogance of someone who had never experienced defeat. "You are in the wrong place, small one," he said. "This section is for warriors." Katie looked up at him. She had to crane her neck to meet his eyes. "My assignment says Barrack 7. This is Barrack 7. Assignments can change." His claws extended slightly, just enough to catch the light. "We do not share space with prey animals." The other Varax laughed. The Vesik pretended not to notice, focusing on their equipment. The Moravi continued watching with those unblinking golden eyes. Katie felt her heart beating faster, but she kept her voice steady. "I am not prey, and I am not leaving." The Varax leaned closer. His breath was hot and smelled like copper. "My name is Draxus. Remember it, human, because I'm going to teach you exactly where you belong in the natural order of things." Before Katie could respond, the station's announcement system activated. "Attention all cadets. Report to Training Hall Alpha in 30 standard minutes for orientation combat assessment." Draxus stepped back, his lips pulling away from his teeth in what might have been a smile. "We will continue this conversation later, human. After I show everyone what happens when prey tries to play warrior." He walked away, the other Varax following close behind. Katie stood alone in the middle of the barracks, surrounded by empty bunks and hostile stares. She began unpacking her gear with steady hands. She had trained for 3 years for this moment. She had studied every species in the coalition, learned their fighting styles, memorized their weaknesses. She knew things about Varax anatomy that most Varax did not know about themselves. The galaxy saw humans as small and weak. They saw short lifespans and assumed inexperience. They saw soft skin and assumed vulnerability. They had no idea what humans were truly capable of. Katie finished arranging her equipment and checked her personal display unit. 25 minutes until the assessment. 25 minutes until she would step into an arena and face creatures 3 times her size. She was not afraid. She was ready. Back on Earth, there was an old saying, "It is not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog." The Coalition was about to learn exactly what that meant. Training Hall Alpha was the largest enclosed space Katie had ever seen. The ceiling rose 50 meters above the floor, supported by massive pillars of reinforced metal. The training area itself was a circular platform surrounded by observation galleries that could hold thousands of spectators. Today, those galleries were filled with instructors, senior officers, and cadets waiting for their turn to fight. The air buzzed with anticipation. The orientation combat assessment was a tradition at Korath Academy, a way to establish the baseline skills of each new class. Katie stood at the edge of the arena, watching as 2 Vesik cadets fought with training blades. Their forearms moved in complex patterns, creating a dance of metal and motion. The fight ended when one cadet disarmed the other with a spinning maneuver that Katie memorized instantly. Commander Torvak stood in the center of the arena, his voice amplified by hidden speakers. The assessment tests basic combat readiness. Cadets will be assigned opponents through random selection. All combat is non-lethal. Standard training weapons only. A holographic display flickered to life, showing the matchup pairings. Names appeared in sequence, each one met with murmurs from the crowd. Varax against Thesic, Moravi against Moravi. Standard pairings that made sense. Then Katie's name appeared. Catherine. Brennan versus Drax's Core. The murmurs became louder. Katie heard someone laugh. She heard the words impossible and slaughter and waste of time. She ignored them all. Admiral Patterson sat in the observation gallery, her face carefully blank. Her aide leaned close and whispered something about protesting the pairing. The Admiral shook her head. Let it play out. Katie walked into the arena. The floor was smooth metal, slightly textured for traction. Good. She had trained on similar surfaces. A weapons rack rose from the floor in front of her. Each species had their own section, displaying training weapons designed to match their natural abilities. For Virax, there were weighted gauntlets that enhanced their already devastating claws. For Thesic, there were multi-grip blades designed for four-handed combat. For Moravi, there were lightweight staffs perfect for aerial maneuvers. For humans, there was a single option. A standard-issue non-lethal baton. 18 inches long. Reinforced polymer construction. Shock function on the tip. Katie picked it up. The weight was familiar in her hand. She had trained with this exact weapon for 2 years. Draxus stepped into the arena on the opposite side. He selected his training gauntlets and flexed his claws, each one now enhanced with blunted metal tips. He was nearly 3 times Katie's size. His reach advantage was enormous. His natural armor could shrug off blows that would cripple a human. He looked at the baton in her hand and laughed. You choose a stick? Against me? Katie did not respond. She settled into her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. The baton hung loose at her side. The Virax laughed again. When I am finished with you, your admiral will beg to withdraw from this program. Humans do not belong here. You are prey, and I am a predator. The starting signal sounded. Draxus charged immediately. This was standard Virax tactics. They relied on overwhelming force, closing distance before their opponents could react. Against most species, it worked perfectly. A Virax at full charge was like a freight train made of muscle and claws. Katie watched him come. She counted his steps. She noted the way his weight shifted with each stride. She saw the slight drop of his shoulder that telegraphed his opening attack. When he was 2 meters away, she moved, not backward, not to the sides. She moved forward and down, sliding underneath his outstretched arms in a motion so fast that most observers missed it entirely. Her baton struck the back of his right knee. The shock function activated on contact, sending an electrical pulse directly into the nerve cluster that controlled his leg. The leg buckled instantly. Draxus stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward even as his body betrayed him. Katie was already moving, rising from her slide and spinning to face his back. Her second strike hit his left wrist. Another shock pulse. His gauntlet spasmed and his claws retracted involuntarily. Her third strike landed at the base of his skull, precisely targeting the small gap between his scales where the spine met the brainstem. Every Virax had this vulnerability. They protected it carefully in real combat. Draxus had not expected to need protection in a simple assessment against a human. He collapsed face first onto the arena floor. The entire exchange had taken less than 4 seconds. The arena fell completely silent. Hundreds of aliens stared at the impossible scene before them. A human female standing over a fallen Virax warrior, a baton in her hand. Not even breathing hard. Commander Torvak was the first to move. He stepped forward, his yellow eyes wide with something Katie did not immediately recognize. Later, she would realize it was the beginning of fear. Medical team to the arena, he said slowly. The assessment will continue after a brief recess. 2 Virax medics rushed onto the floor and began examining Draxus. He was alive, already beginning to regain consciousness. No permanent damage had been done. But his pride would take much longer to heal. Katie walked to the edge of the arena and waited. She could feel every eye in the hall watching her, watching the small human who had just done the impossible. Admiral Patterson allowed herself a small smile. This was exactly why Katie Brennan had been chosen for this program. Not because she was the strongest fighter humanity had. Not because she was the fastest or the most experienced. She had been chosen because she could demonstrate what humans were capable of without killing anyone. The galaxy needed to understand something important. Humans were not large. Humans were not powerful. Humans did not have claws or scales or natural weapons, but humans had spent millions of years surviving against creatures that did. They had learned to fight smarter, faster, dirtier. They had learned to exploit weaknesses that stronger species did not even know they had, and they had learned to do it all with nothing but simple tools in their hands. Katie felt the weight of the baton against her leg. 18 inches of polymer and circuits. The kind of weapon security guards carried on Earth for crowd control. She had just used it to defeat a warrior from the most feared military species in the galaxy. And this was only the beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the orientation assessment, and Katie Brennan had become the most talked about cadet at Karth Academy. She was not the fastest cadet. The Mojave could move through the air with a speed that made them almost invisible. She was not the strongest cadet. Every Varax in the program could lift 10 times her body weight without effort. She was not even the most skilled cadet. Several Desek had trained in weapons combat since they were children, but Katie was something else entirely. She was consistent. She was relentless. And most importantly, she was adaptable. Every morning, she woke before the other cadets and ran through the station's maintenance corridors. The low ceilings and narrow passages made it impossible for the larger species to follow. She built her endurance in places where size meant nothing. Every afternoon, she studied the combat styles of her fellow cadets. She watched every match in the training halls, taking mental notes on techniques and vulnerabilities. She asked questions of anyone willing to answer, learning details that most species kept secret from outsiders. Every evening, she practiced alone in an empty storage bay she had converted into a personal training space. She combined what she had learned, mixing Varax power strikes with Mojave evasion techniques and Desek joint locks. She created something new, something no one in the coalition had ever seen before. The results spoke for themselves. In 3 weeks of combat assessments, Katie had not lost a single match. She had defeated Varax warriors twice her size by targeting their vulnerable joints. She had overcome Desek speed by predicting their patterns. She had grounded Mojave flyers by disrupting their balance at critical moments. She did all of this with the same simple baton she had used on the first day. Commander Torvik watched her progress with growing concern. After the 3rd week, he requested a meeting with the full instructor council. Representatives from all 12 participating species attended through holographic links, their faces floating in the air around the conference table. The human presents a problem, Torvik began. His voice was calm, but his scales had darkened to the blue-black shade that indicated stress. She is disrupting the established order of this program. Instructor Vess, the Desek representative, clicked her mandibles in disagreement. Her forearms gestured expressively as she spoke. She defeats her opponents fairly. The rules of combat are clear. Where is the problem? The problem is not what she does, Torvik replied. The problem is what she represents. He pulled up combat footage on the central display. The holographic image showed Katie facing a Varax cadet twice her size. In the recording, she ducked under a powerful swing, struck 3 precise points on the Varax's leg, and watched as he collapsed in a heap. Look at her technique, Torvik said. That combination does not exist in any known fighting style. She developed it herself, combining Desic pressure point knowledge with Moravi timing principles. Adaptation is a valuable trait, said Counselor Prith, the Moravi representative. His golden feathers ruffled with curiosity. Why should this concern us? Because she learned all of this in 3 weeks. Torvek, let that statement hang in the air. 3 weeks. Imagine what 1,000 humans could learn in 3 years. Imagine what 1,000,000 could learn in 3 decades. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They all understood what Torvek was really saying. The Galactic Coalition had maintained peace and stability for centuries because everyone knew their place. The Varaks were the warriors. The Desic were the builders. The Moravi were the diplomats. Each species had strengths and weaknesses that balanced against each other. Humans did not fit this system. They were not the strongest or the fastest or the most intelligent. But they could become any of these things if given enough time. They absorbed knowledge like sponges absorbing water. They adapted to challenges that should have destroyed them. They were unpredictable. And unpredictability was dangerous. The meeting ended without resolution. But Torvek knew what needed to be done. That night, he made a private communication to the Varak's homeworld. The face that appeared on his screen was familiar to every Varak soldier. General Kraz, commander of the Imperial Guard. Leader of the traditionalist faction that had opposed human admission to the coalition from the beginning. I have been watching the reports, the general said. His voice was deep and rough, scarred by decades of battlefield command. The human female is becoming a symbol. Other species are beginning to look at humans differently. What would you have me do? Torvek asked. The final trial approaches in 2 weeks. Every cadet must participate. Many have been injured over the years. Some have died. The general's yellow eyes glittered with cold calculation. Accidents happen in combat training. One more would be unfortunate, but not unusual. Torvek hesitated. He had devoted his entire life to the Varak's military tradition. He believed in strength and hierarchy and the natural order of predator and prey. But what the general was suggesting went beyond tradition. Killing her would create diplomatic complications, he said carefully. The humans would demand an investigation. I did not say kill her, the general replied. I said ensure she does not survive. There is a difference. If she dies fighting, she dies with honor. No one can question the outcome of a fair trial. And if she survives? The general's jaw clicked in the Varak's expression of dark humor. Then we will have learned something important about humanity. Either way, the coalition will have its answer. The communication ended. Torvek sat alone in his quarters, staring at the blank screen for a long time. He thought about the human female and her simple baton. He thought about the way she had defeated Draxus in 4 seconds. He thought about the look in her eyes when she fought, calm and focused, without fear or hesitation. Prey animals did not look like that. Prey animals ran. Prey animals hid. Prey animals accepted their place in the natural order. Katie Brennan did none of these things. She simply continued to improve day after day, as if the very concept of limitation did not apply to her species. Torvek pushed his doubts aside. Orders were orders. The final trial would proceed as planned, and one way or another. The human would face the consequences of challenging the established order, in her quarters. Katie finished her evening training routine and prepared for sleep. She did not know about the conspiracy forming against her. She did not know that powerful forces had decided she was too dangerous to live, but she knew something was wrong. She had felt hostile eyes watching her for days. She had noticed the way certain instructors looked at her, with fear disguised as contempt. She had survived her entire life by trusting her instincts. And her instincts told her that the real test was still coming. She checked her baton one final time before closing her eyes. Whatever happened next, she would be ready. The final trial was the oldest tradition at Karth Academy. For 200 years, every graduating class had faced the same challenge. Cadets were dropped into a hostile environment with minimal equipment and forced to survive for 72 hours. Hunter drones patrolled the simulation, eliminating anyone who failed to evade them. Teams competed against each other for limited resources. Only the strongest survived. Katie stood in the deployment bay, checking her equipment for the third time. A survival pack with water, emergency rations, and basic medical supplies. A navigation unit showing only her starting position. And her baton, the same weapon she had carried since her first day at the academy. The team assignments had been posted that morning. Katie read them twice, making sure she understood correctly. She was assigned to Team 7, 12 members total. 11 Varax cadets. And her. Draxus was her team leader. She recognized the setup immediately. This was no random assignment. Someone had arranged for her to be surrounded by the species she had humiliated most thoroughly. Someone wanted her isolated and vulnerable. But Katie had learned something important during her 3 weeks at the academy. The Varax were not stupid. They were not simple brutes who relied only on strength. They were cunning predators who understood pack tactics and territorial advantage. They were also predictable. She knew exactly what they were planning to do. The transport shuttle carried Team 7 to their deployment zone, a dense jungle environment with thick vegetation and limited visibility. The artificial sky above simulated permanent twilight, making it difficult to track time or direction. Katie was the last to exit the shuttle. The Varax cadets spread out immediately, establishing a defensive perimeter. Draxus stood at the center, his scales almost invisible in the dim light. "Listen carefully," he said, not bothering to include Katie in his eye contact. "We will move in standard formation. I lead, with pairs covering the flanks. The human will take rear guard." The other Varax made sounds of agreement. Rear guard was traditionally the most dangerous position, responsible for watching threats from behind while separated from the main group. Katie nodded without argument. Understood. They moved through the jungle for 6 hours, following a path that Draxus chose without explanation. Katie stayed at the back, watching everything. She noted the patterns of the hunter drones that occasionally appeared overhead. She memorized the terrain, marking potential escape routes and defensive positions. She counted the steps between each team member, measuring distances that might become important later. As artificial night fell, Draxus called for a halt near a small river. The sound of running water would mask their movements, but it would also mask approaching threats. "We camp here," Draxus announced. "The human takes first watch." Katie climbed into the tree canopy above the camp. From her elevated position, she could see the entire area and several hundred meters of surrounding jungle. The Varax settled into their sleeping positions below, their massive bodies covering the ground like living boulders. She watched Draxus approach 2 other cadets. They spoke quietly in the Varax language, their voices too soft for the translation implant to catch. But Katie did not need to hear their words. Their body language told her everything. They kept glancing toward her position. They gestured with their claws in small, sharp movements. One of them made the Varax sign for silence. Katie checked her baton and settled in to wait. The attack came 3 hours after midnight. She heard them first. Varax were quiet for their size, but quiet for a Varax was still louder than a human footstep. They were climbing the tree from 3 different directions, moving with the coordination of practiced hunters. Katie had 3 minutes to prepare. She used every second. When the first attacker reached her platform, he found it empty. He paused, confused, and signaled to the others with a soft clicking sound. Katie dropped from the branch above him. She landed on his shoulders, her legs wrapping around his neck for balance. Her baton struck the nerve cluster at the base of his skull before he could react. The shock pulse sent him into unconsciousness instantly. She rode his falling body halfway down, then kicked off toward the second attacker. He saw her coming but could not adjust in time. She ducked under his desperate swipe and drove her baton into the joint where his arm met his shoulder. The arm went limp. A second strike to his temple, and he was falling. The third attacker was smarter. He stopped his climb and waited, forcing Katie to come to him. His position was strong, braced between two thick branches with his claws ready. Katie reached into her survival pack and pulled out the emergency flare. It was meant for signaling rescue teams, but it had another use. She activated it directly in front of his face. The Varak's visual system was sensitive to sudden bright light. The flare blinded him completely for several seconds. By the time his vision cleared, Katie had already struck him 3 times. He fell without making a sound. 3 down. 9 to go. The commotion had woken the camp below. Katie could hear Draxus shouting orders, could see the Varak's cadets arming themselves and spreading out to search for her. She did not climb down. She moved through the canopy instead, jumping from branch to branch with the ease of long practice. Humans had evolved in forests. Their ancestors had spent millions of years climbing trees to escape predators. That instinct had never truly left them. She found the next group of Varaks searching along the riverbank. They were looking down, expecting her to be hiding in the underbrush. They never thought to look up. Katie dropped onto the lead Varaks from above. Her baton caught him across the face, the shock function activating on contact. He went down screaming. The second Varaks turned toward the sound, exposing his back. Katie was already there, striking the vulnerable point beneath his shoulder blade. 2 more fell to attacks they never saw coming. Katie moved through the jungle like a ghost, appearing from unexpected angles, striking vulnerable points, disappearing before the Varaks could respond. By dawn, she had neutralized all 12 members of her team. She sat on a fallen log near the river, catching her breath for the first time in hours. Her body ached. She had taken several hits during the night, and bruises were already forming across her arms and ribs. But she was alive. The Varaks lay scattered across the jungle floor, unconscious but breathing. No permanent damage. No deaths. Just 12 warriors who would wake up with headaches and wounded pride. Katie checked her baton. The shock function was nearly depleted from overuse, but the weapon had held together through everything. She thought about what had just happened. 12 trained Varak soldiers had tried to kill her under cover of darkness. She had defeated them all with a piece of equipment designed for crowd control. On Earth, there was another old saying, "It is not about fighting fair. It is about winning." The coalition was learning that lesson the hard way. Katie stood up and began walking toward the extraction point. The trial was not over yet, but her part in it was finished. She had sent her message. Now, it was time to see if anyone had been listening. Commander Torvak watched the footage in silence. The main display showed multiple angles of the previous night, captured by the simulation's monitoring systems. He watched as a single human female moved through the jungle like a predator from ancient nightmares. He watched as she eliminated 12 Varak's warriors, one after another, using nothing but a simple baton and tactics that no one had ever seen before. Beside him, Admiral Patterson stood with her arms crossed over her chest. Her expression revealed nothing, but her eyes held a glint of satisfaction that she did not try to hide. "This is impossible," Torvik said finally. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "She is one human. They are 12 trained Varak soldiers. She should be dead. Lieutenant Brennan had several advantages that your cadets did not account for," Patterson replied calmly. "Superior night vision adaptation. Humans can see relatively well in low light conditions. Better endurance. We can maintain physical activity for much longer periods than most species. More efficient temperature regulation in humid environments. She paused and turned to face the Varax commander directly. But most importantly, she had motivation. Your cadets were trying to eliminate a nuisance. They were overconfident. They assumed they would win simply because they were bigger. Patterson's voice hardened slightly. Lieutenant Brennan was fighting for her life. She knew what was happening. She prepared accordingly. Torvak stared at the frozen image on the display. It showed Katie standing over the last fallen Varax, her baton raised, her face completely calm. She did not look like prey. She did not look like a victim who had barely survived an attack. She looked like a hunter who had just finished her work. Your species frightens me, Torvak admitted. It was the first time he had ever spoken those words aloud to anyone outside his own kind. Patterson nodded slowly. That is an appropriate response, Commander. May I show you something? She activated her personal display unit and projected a new hologram into the air. The images showed shows from human history, spanning thousands of years. Our species did not evolve as the dominant predator on our planet, Patterson said. For millions of years, we were prey. Larger animals hunted us. Faster animals caught us. Stronger animals killed us. The hologram showed ancient humans huddled in caves, surrounded by darkness full of glowing eyes. But we survived. We learned to use tools when our claws were not sharp enough. We learned to hunt in groups when our individual strength was not sufficient. We learned to adapt to any environment, any challenge, any threat. The images shifted to show human warriors through history. Stone spears against mammoths. Bronze swords against empires. Steel tanks against fortresses. Each generation faced impossible odds. Each generation found a way to overcome them. By the time we became the dominant species on Earth, that survival instinct was written into our very genes. We do not accept defeat. We do not accept our place in any natural order. We simply continue to improve until we win. Torvak watched the parade of images with growing unease. He had studied human military history during his preparation for the exchange program. He had read about their conflicts, their tactics, their weapons. But seeing it presented this way, as a continuous thread of adaptation and survival, was different. It was terrifying. The coalition has made a miscalculation, he said slowly. Yes, Patterson agreed. You assumed humans would be prey because we are small. Because our species is young compared to yours. Because we do not have natural weapons or armor. She smiled, and for the first time, Torvak truly understood why other species had learned to fear the expression. You were wrong. The simulation ended. Medical teams moved into the jungle to retrieve the fallen Varax cadets. Katie Brennan emerged from the recovery area, still carrying her baton. She was exhausted and bruised, but she walked under her own power. She approached Commander Torvak and stopped at attention. Her salute was perfect, exactly as the Academy regulations required. Lieutenant Brennan reporting mission complete, sir. All hostile elements neutralized. 0 fatalities. Torvak looked at her for a long moment. She stood before him, this small creature who had just done the impossible. She had defeated 12 of his kind without killing a single one. She had proven that humans could be merciful even while they were being deadly. Slowly, he raised his hand in the Varax gesture of respect. It was a greeting reserved for superior officers or worthy opponents. He had never given it to a non-Varax before. You have earned your place here, human. I was wrong to doubt you. Katie lowered her salute. With respect, Commander, you were not wrong to doubt me. You were wrong to underestimate my species. She turned and walked toward the medical station to have her injuries treated. Her steps were steady despite her exhaustion. She did not look back. Torvak watched her go. Then he turned to Admiral Patterson. "What happens now?" "Now?" Patterson began walking toward the observation gallery exit. "Now you report what happened here to your superiors. You tell them that a single human female, armed with a non-lethal weapon, defeated 12 Iraq soldiers who were trying to kill her. You tell them that she did it without taking a single life. She paused at the doorway and looked back. And then you ask yourself this question, Commander. If one human can do this in 5 weeks of training, what could all of humanity do if we ever decided to stop being friendly?" She left without waiting for an answer. Tarvak stood alone in the observation room, surrounded by displays showing a jungle floor littered with unconscious Varax warriors. He thought about the general's orders. He thought about the conspiracy to eliminate the human threat before it could grow. They had failed. Not just in killing Katie Brennan, but in understanding what humanity truly represented. Humans were not prey that had wandered into predator territory. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who had faced extinction countless times and had always found a way to continue. They were adapters who could learn from any species and improve on what they learned. They were builders who could create weapons and tools to overcome any natural disadvantage. And now they were members of the Galactic Coalition, with full access to technologies and knowledge that they had never encountered before. Torvak made a decision. He would report what happened honestly. He would not spin the story or minimize the humans' achievement. The Coalition needed to understand what they were dealing with, because the alternative was much worse. If they continued to underestimate humanity, if they continued to treat them as prey to be controlled or eliminated, they would eventually discover just how dangerous a cornered human could become. And by then, it would be too late. In the medical station, Katie Brennan sat quietly while a Desic medic treated her injuries. Her body ached, but her mind was calm. She had done what she came here to do. Humanity had sent its message. They had proven that size and strength were not the only measures of a warrior. They had shown that adaptation and determination could overcome any natural advantage. The galaxy would remember this day. They would tell stories about the human female who faced 12 predators with nothing but a stick and wand. And maybe, just maybe, they would think twice before underestimating humanity again. Katie closed her eyes and allowed herself a small smile. This was only the beginning.